Purple Robe here, and welcome to Chapter 4 of Madcap. Yeah, it's getting pretty crazy now, isn't it? I hope you enjoy my sense of humor. A lot of people don't, but if you're here at Chapter 4, I know you do. So, enjoy.
Sure, the fire was hot. It could easily keep up a steady boil on most any metal container, probably liquefying lesser materials. But Skip was as thick-skinned as they came. He could resist almost anything. When Clemens de Brom brought that skunk's scent gland toward him, he cooled down to a simmer at once. Skip knew, even if that idiot de Brom didn't, that if he boiled that stink sack, the smell would never go away, no matter how much he was scoured. What the hell would you want to boil a skunk's scent gland for anyway? Wouldn't be of any use, magically speaking, and Skip knew he was, after all, a cauldron. And as everyone knew, it's the cauldron that does the magic for the magician. The magician, or witch, as most cauldron users are commonly called, is simply there to acquire the correct ingredients and mix them in the proper sequence. Of course, this wasn't the first time he had refused to boil for similar reasons. At least the hooded man talked to Skip. He used proper human-to-cauldron etiquette, and did what he was told. Skip almost didn't mind performing for the hooded man, for he knew how to treat a cauldron of Skip's station. But de Brom was a fool. He received his arcane knowledge from books. Skip didn't know who had written these books, but it was obvious that they were not made by people with any direct contact to the cauldron community. It was also clear to him that de Brom was thoroughly unaware of Skip's latent intelligence. Unfortunately, Skip could not speak to de Brom without de Brom's help. The human had to open the lines of communication between them in the time-honored fashion before the cauldron could utter a single syllable. The hooded man had opened these lines right off the bat, knowing that he couldn't get anything accomplished without Skip's help. When the proper ritual is done, cauldrons and humans can maintain a telepathic link. If the evil prick who lived alone in the middle of the forests of death had been watching the hooded man more closely, he would have learned the easy ritual and could perhaps be moving closer to his goals. Whatever those were. At the moment, Skip didn't care. His only goal was to make sure the skunk sack didn't boil so he could save his sense of smell for the next 100 or so years. Clemens de Brom bustled about his laboratory, muttering harsh curses under his breath. The damnable pot stopped boiling again. No matter how much he stoked the fire, he couldn't produce a single bubble. In fact, he was even losing his ability to create steam. The hooded man had departed a short while ago, stepping off lightly into the forests of death, and now Clemens had a mission. He wasn't clear on all of the stranger's intentions, but he knew what he must do to help. The hooded man explained about reality as it applied to the many different dimensions in the multiverse, and how in some places there were spaces that merged two or more at a time. These areas the hooded man called gateways or gaps. They'd all been locked a long time ago. They were monitored by a powerful being, and any tampering was observed and dealt with severely. The gateways must be kept closed. The hooded man felt differently. This was because he was obviously evil, perhaps even more so than de Brom himself. For this, Clemens admired the hell out of him. In fact, he attempted to admire the hell so far out of the hooded man that he might admire it into himself. Well, he thought as he sighed, it was a dream of his. Meanwhile, it was now de Brom's job, within the hooded man's scheme, to maneuver the hat, which was somehow the key to all of this. From a strange desert dimension to the land of Fistendantlus. Clemens was at this moment attempting to have a message waiting for the wielders of the hat when they arrived in the desert. This required a fairly difficult send object spell. The spell called for a boiled skunk's scent gland, and damn it, de Brom was going to boil that sucker and make magic, or he wasn't the evil prick who lived alone in the middle of the forests of death. Clemens prepared a small but extremely intense fire in his front yard. Over it, suspended by a meat spit, swung a small, lonely kettle. Inside the kettle, a green goose egg boiled rapidly in a few gallons of fresh water. De Brom was ready to recite the proper incantation while holding the message he intended to send in his left hand at heart level. With his right hand, he held the tiny pouch in position to toss it into the mixture. The time was at hand. De Brom hurled the sack toward the kettle. Skip listened quietly to the goings-on outside. was all he could do to sit still and not go insane. The tiny kettle was shrieking its rim off. It was being burned alive. He just prayed that de Brom would finish his work quickly, and then, realizing that he couldn't accomplish his goals with an ordinary pot, he would take it off the flame. If he tossed in the scent gland, the kettle would stink for 100 years, but at least it would live through the experience. With his supreme sense of hearing, Skip caught the plopping sound of the tiny piece of skunk dropping into the water over de Brom's intonations, and the kettle's constant screaming. He heard a great pop and a high-pitched fizzle, followed by loud bellows of rage from the human. Suddenly the front door burst open. Thick clouds of white smoke entered the household, surrounding Clemens de Brom as he scurried inside, clawing at his face and yelling at the top of his lungs. First, he made for the kitchen, knocking over everything in his path as he reached for jars of cool, fresh water that he kept in the pantry. After tearing the closet door off its hinges, he located the jars. Empty! Next, howling and clutching his face, which Skip noticed was smoking along with his cloak, he made for the bedroom, where he plunged his face into the wash basin. Skip heard the clang as de Brom's skull smacked the porcelain bowl, and recalled that he had seen Clemens use the water from it for his last spell attempt after the hooded man had exhausted his pantry supply earlier in the day. Finally, de Brom came bustling out of the bedroom, looking wildly around the house until his eyes caught sight of the cauldron. It was filled to capacity with cool, fresh water. Clemens stumbled blindly over and rammed his head into Skip's liquid. Skip decided that it would be the perfect time to begin boiling again. Clemens de Brom paced before his cauldron. His face was wrapped in clean, white, soft linen, and he smelled awful. His trusty rabid rat familiar, Barnabas, was off in the woods tracking down a second skunk. Clemens pondered his choices aloud. "Blasted cauldron," he muttered. "Boiling when I don't want you to, not boiling when I do. You're a menace." After tossing the skunk's scent gland into the water, it had exploded all over de Brom's face. The terribly hot, foul-smelling pieces seared into his skin as the putrid water splashed his best cloak. After getting the horrid stuff off, he became more determined than ever. Skip had stopped boiling as soon as de Brom removed his face, and so Clemens was brooding more than anything else. "If you don't boil, I'll have to keep using the tea kettle until I get the spell right. It was my first time trying. Maybe I screwed up. I'll keep at it." Skip understood that when de Brom had made up his mind, he could go a long way before becoming discouraged. This would mean quite a bit more torture for the little pot, and possibly its demise. Skip had attempted to calm her down after her hardship earlier, and found her to be a very nice, sensible old gal. She hadn't the magical ability of a cauldron, but she could cook up one hell of a good pot of tea. She specialized in herbal brews, and had been keeping de Brom happy for over 30 years. And this was her payback, sighed Skip. He knew that no matter what happened, de Brom would not achieve his goal by means of the kettle, whose name was Jazan. He realized that he must do something to save her. But what? If he could just get the stupid human to invoke the ritual, he could vocalize to the idiot and tell him that he was wasting his time with Jazan, and that if he had any magical aspirations, he should bring the hooded man back and study under him for a few years until he could build up a base knowledge, as well as a working relationship with Skip. Then, maybe, the two could come to an agreement, and de Brom could get some work done. There was a scratching at the front door, and Clemens sprung from his seat, calling out his familiar's name. He opened the door, and a huge, slim, gray rat scuttled inside, clutching a dead skunk in its jaw. "Good boy, Barnabas." De Brom took the skunk from his pet, and with a carving knife from an ornate box on the coffee table, carefully extracted the animal's scent gland, and then threw the remains outside for the rat to feast on. "I'll get the pot boiling again." He went off to prepare a repeat performance of the spell he had fouled up the first time. Skip realized there was no time to lose. As soon as Jazan saw de Brom come back outside, she began wailing. Why the hell couldn't he just talk to the fool, thought Skip. He didn't have to follow all those stupid old rules and traditions anyway. The tradition said that Jazan should die a cruel death. It didn't seem right to him. Besides, he was Skip, a cauldron with an attitude, and everyone better beware. "Hey, moron!" Skip awaited a reply, but got none. "Yeah, you in the smelly black robe with the bandages on your face. I'm talking to you." Skip heard a gasp from outside, and then a curse. Clemens had dropped the scent gland at the sound of the voice in his head, and it had shattered at his feet, spraying his shoes. Who is there?" asked de Brom, his voice wavering with uncertainty and fear. Where are you? Show yourself!" "I'm in your house." answered Skip. He heard DeBrum scuttle to the door, but it did not open. Skip continued, "Before you come in, though, take Jazan off the fire." "Who?" asked Clemens meekly. "The kettle! Get her off the fire now!" Skip took a more commanding tone. The cauldron heard DeBrum move to obey at once. He heard the human burn himself in the process, but accomplished his task nonetheless. From a small clump of leaves outside, Jazan thanked him. "Now come inside and let's talk." "Who is this?" Clemens demanded. He may be afraid, but this was still his domain, and he was the evil prick who lived alone in the middle of the forests of death. "It's Skip!" he remarked triumphantly. He waited a response. It was quiet. He waited longer. It was still quiet. He waited a long time. He wondered if perhaps DeBrum had fainted when he had heard who he was dealing with. But after a while, Skip came to the conclusion that Clemens had no idea what he was talking about. "This is your cauldron speaking. Come inside. We need to talk. Metal to man."
That was Chapter 4 of Madcap. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to get past Chapter 5, there's only one chapter left here on YouTube, then you need to get to my Patreon page.